Breaking news right off the top tonight. The 10th East Texas church fire since just the beginning of the year is burning tonight. Heavy smoke and flames are reported at this hour at Dover Baptist Church. That's 21166 FM 1995. That's near Highway 110 in Smith County.
10 churches were broken into, items were stolen, and the churches were set on fire by 2 young men.
The yard was full. Most were crying, naturally, to see our church building was burning.
It was the first day of the year in 2010. As the smell of fire and smoke wafted through the air, members of Little Hope Baptist Church in Canton gathered on the lawn, watching as flames rose from their place of worship.
We were fearful that we'd lose the entire building.
Less than 25 miles away on that same day, firefighters battled to save the Faith Church of Athens.
It occurred during the daytime.
2 weeks went by until on January 12th, Lake Athens Baptist Church and Grace Community Church in Athens would be turned to rubble and ash.
I was horrified, actually, and concerned that it would continue. I think it's beyond just an anger issue when people start fires in worship space. And I understand there were also burglaries, and maybe they were just trying to hide their evidence, but it's very frightening to the whole community, the whole religious community.
And it did continue. East Texas firefighters would go on to battle 6 more blazes. Tylen Baptist Church in Tyler on January 16th. First Church of Christ Scientists in Tyler, January 17th. Prairie Creek Fellowship in Lindale, January 20th. Russell Memorial United Methodist Church in Willis Point, February 4th. And then Dover Baptist Church in Lindale and Clear Spring Missionary Baptist Church, February 8th.
It doesn't seem to be a matter of certain denominations or size of church or the financial or the location. We just think this is a terrible, unfortunate situation.
I don't want our community or the East Texas community to be in fear. We're going to catch and stop this.
After nearly 2 months, 19-year-old Jason Bourque of Lindale and 21-year-old Daniel McAllister from Ben Wheeler were arrested, charged with arson, and are now serving life sentences in different prisons. Now Smith County Sheriff Larry Smith was a member of the local and national response team with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, also known as the ATF. He worked alongside more than 70 federal agents, 50 investigators from the Department of Public Safety, and 30 Texas Rangers. It would become the largest criminal investigation in East Texas's history.
ATF did not get involved in this investigation on January the 1st. They had 2 fires that day that were handled locally.
Smith says even once ATF became involved, the first fire, Little Hope, wasn't thought to be arson at first.
It was determined that the Christmas tree started the fire, but over here in the middle of the room, you have a wooden piano that's totally has no wood left on it whatsoever, and things in between are not as damaged as they are over here. That's a clue.
But the ATF wouldn't put that information together until nearly the end of the investigation. Yet Little Hope would be a key part of catching Bourque and McAllister.
I think probably the people in charge knew that it was arson from the beginning, but they didn't want to give other people ideas to do the same thing.
2 Athens churches catch fire within hours of each other, and arson is suspected.
It is tonight's top story.
Footprints were discovered around what remained of the Lake Athens Baptist Church, the 3rd fire. This is when police concluded it was 2 people who were burning down churches around East Texas.
We found significant evidence that proved very beneficial later on in this investigation. It was a rock and 2 shoe prints, 1 shoe and 1 boot print, which later on toward the end of the investigation proved to be very important because we found the footwear that made both the tracks. Never until this investigation did I get a footprint and some shoe footwear that was a 100% match.
Some of the footprints were determined to be a size 13 Red Wing work boot, a brand that had been discontinued. The ATF purchased a pair to compare the tread. Smith says it turned out to be a perfect match.
But the second one, the shoe print, the tennis shoe print, was identified as Skechers shoe, but I believe that particular Skechers tread print could have been on any of 8 different style shoes.
With fear of another fire lingering throughout the religious community, the investigation started to heat up when Thailand Baptist Church was set on fire 4 days after the 3rd and 4th churches. Smith says this prompted him to activate the ATF National Response Team.
You have your fire protection engineers, electrical engineers, certified fire investigators, certified explosive specialists.
We just knew that the devil was busy. He was really busy trying to hinder God's work, and couldn't believe that a person would actually want to burn church buildings.
We have a lot of agencies involved in this investigation: federal, state, local, county, and city agencies. If you put them all together, they would fill up the majority of this room.
Lab technicians came with the National Response Team for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, also referred to as the ATF. Now with a local and national team working on the case, as well as local police, the Department of Public Safety, and the Texas Rangers, the hope was to quicken the process of going through evidence found at the 4 fires being investigated at that time.
We still had to do our certified fire investigator report for Grace Community in Lake Athens Baptist, and gave us an opportunity to look at what other evidence we could find at Thailand Baptist and then go back.
Other evidence, like the rock used to break into the Lake Athens Baptist Church.
We have DNA from the rocks and the bricks that from the previous churches we collected from. We don't know whose DNA it was.
It was recommended by the law enforcement personnel that everybody have someone on site for the next few days at least, until the people can be apprehended.
Larry Smith is the sheriff of Smith County, but back in 2010, he was one of the agents investigating the arsons for the ATF's response team. Inside the remains of every sanctuary set ablaze so far, Smith described what he saw back then as makeshift campfires.
The same thing we were finding, the hymnals and anything you could find, pew cushions and things like that stacked together in order to do the fire.
There was still a puzzle piece missing, buried in the ashes, it seemed. The ATF didn't know what was being used to ignite the church's property, which also led to confusion with the evidence found from the ATF's K-9 Nina, who had been trained to point out where a fire's point of origin was.
She would alert on all these places that, from a fire investigator standpoint, was legitimate alert, but all the chemistry from where we'd take the residual from and submit it to the lab came back negative for any accelerant.
This meant nothing was showing up on the test as what sparked the downfall of the churches.
For his loving kindness is everlasting.
Nothing prepares you for this. I've been here 3 years. Some people have been here for 50 years. It's hard to see this.
Investigators didn't give up, though. Other items found in the church shone a light on what it was.
This was during the flu season, as we saw the big gallon jugs of Purell and hand sanitizer. That's what they were using to start the fire.
Hand sanitizers are alcohol-based, which according to Smith is significant in 2 ways. It has a high evaporation rate and is easily washed away by water. Law enforcement was getting rid of the evidence unknowingly.
The dog was right, but the chemistry couldn't be captured. The ATF even had to change its protocol after this investigation.
Smith explained ATF agents quit using hand sanitizer after giving dogs treats to avoid confusion in future investigations. Even after figuring out the pattern inside the church of how the fire was built and started, there still wasn't a clear path outside to determine how the churches were chosen.
It breaks my heart to think that someone would have the gall to do something like that when the churches try to help people. We don't try to hurt nobody.
One of the problems law enforcement encountered that slowed them down was the frequency of the fires.
The church is the people. The church isn't the building. So Thailand Baptist Church is very much alive today.
January 17th, one day after the Thailand Baptist Church in Tyler was set on fire, the First Church of Christ Scientist in the heart of the city burned as well.
It was daylight hours when First Church of Christ Scientist was caught on fire, and the only thing hiding him from Broadway Street, which is right on Broadway, was some hedges.
A few days later in the morning hours, smoke was seen rising from Prairie Creek Fellowship in Lindale.
So being targeted doesn't really surprise me, because anyone that's trying to do good is going to be a target for somebody that's trying to do bad.
All of the fires had been set at different times of the day, at different days of the week, and in 3 different counties. Wanting to find a connection between the churches, law enforcement tried a different approach by mapping out where the fires had already taken place.
ATF has forensic profilers, and kind of like the ones you see on TV. Edgewood would be the next church, and it ended up being Wills Point.
The map might not have shown where the next fire was, but Smith says this would lead them to a different clue.
They're doing church fires here, here, and here. They must live somewhere in the middle.
Arson wasn't the only crime committed 10 years ago by Jason Bourque and Daniel McAllister, the 2 men responsible for burning down 10 churches in East Texas. Electronics and musical instruments were also stolen.
We recovered a couple guitars, and were able to identify at least one of them as having come from Lake Athens Baptist Church.
A video camera was also found at a pawn shop in Tyler with a wedding on it.
Because the wedding was still on that when we recovered the camera, we could tell what church it came out of.
The ATF was also gathering evidence through a tip line.
6:10 a.m. 3 seconds, February 4, 2010.
Bandit County 911.
Yes, there's a fire in Wills Point.
At the church next door to the fire department?
Yes.
You burn God's house, at some point you're going to get caught.
The 7th fire happened in downtown Wills Point. It would be the most dangerous of the church fires. The roof collapsed around firefighters, nearly killing 2 of them as they worked to put out the flames.
Lord, what has happened? I was just devastated. I immediately started crying, and you think about the memories.
The final fires would take place the evening of February 8th, only 39 days since the first fire at Little Hope Baptist Church in Canton.
This was the first black church that had burned. And they had people buried from years before. They have the cemetery black. You know, it's just a shame that something like that would happen.
Near the county lines for Smith and Van Zandt counties, Jason Bourque and Daniel McAllister, the 2 young men responsible for setting the fires, hit their 9th and 10th marks. Dover Baptist Church and Clear Spring Missionary Baptist Church.
We started working both of those fires, and the same thing we were finding, the hymnals and anything you could find, pew cushions and things like that stacked together in order to do the fire.
And then nothing. The church fires stopped, but things didn't cool off. Law enforcement started a hotline for East Texans to call in with tips. This would be how the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or the ATF, learned Bourque and McAllister's names.
We got a phone call from a female saying that her husband was good friends with 2 guys that had claimed that they were the ones doing these church fires.
That call changed it all. 17-year-old Brianna Wilkerson would tell the police that one night while backroading, her now former husband's friends admitted to him about the arsons.
He told me they admitted to doing the fires to him, and I wasn't allowed to say anything.
Investigators brought both Brianna and Richard Wilkerson in for questioning. While Brianna felt the pair could have set the fires, Richard would tell police he wasn't sure it was his friends.
And they were joking about, all these churches catching on fire and everything. And this is when it first started happening. Well, I didn't know if, I didn't really know if it was true or not, so I was like, I blew it off. I was like, whatever.
Smith County Sheriff Larry Smith was working this case back in 2010 with the ATF. He says talking with the teenagers provided insight into who he believed Bourque and McAllister were. It turned out the 2 young men had both attended the First Baptist of Ben Wheeler.
Well, they were in the nursery together at church and grew up together.
Jason Bourque was raised in Lindale by his grandparents. He graduated from Van High School at the top of his class.
He was a debate champion. He was a Eagle Scout. Got everything he wanted, just about.
In 2010, Bourque was 19 and attending Tyler Junior College after being kicked out of the University of Texas at Tyler.
He goes to UT Tyler, and he's no longer a big man on campus.
At 21 years old, McAllister was traveling back and forth by bus from East Texas to the San Antonio area to see his fiancée.
He was living with my husband's parents, but he moved to San Antonio.
Daniel McAllister grew up in Ben Wheeler with his parents and 2 older sisters, Christy and Jessica. He was homeschooled, but never graduated. McAllister's sister Christy would later tell police before the fires, Daniel had been working in construction.
And he said he'd been off because they had run out of work or were waiting on materials or something, and then he just never went back.
When he was 19, McAllister's mother passed away from a stroke. Small town gossip was that Daniel's faith went with her.
My mom was real big in church, and she was the nursery director there. She was there every time the doors were open.
I think everybody's talking about it. I heard it at the gym. I heard it at Walmart yesterday. We had a meeting of the religious churches, religious groups in churches. About 125 people came to learn more. But I think most people are trying to guess, is it a professional, is it a child, is it a group of kids?
The names of the arsonists, Jason Bourque and Daniel McAllister, weren't the only tips law enforcement received from its reporting line.
We've only got these tips within the last week or so.
One of the congregation members who was at Clear Spring Baptist Church the night of the final fires would call with another important clue.
We found out there was a small blue vehicle that was seen in the area, and this is out in the middle of nowhere. There's no reason for a vehicle to be parked there.
Federal agents with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or the ATF, as well as local law enforcement and several other agencies would begin searching East Texas for blue cars.
Jason drives the car, and he usually comes to my house, and he'll hang out with us, hang out for about a couple minutes, and those two will leave.
Okay. What kind of car is it that he drives when he comes to pick up Daniel McAllister?
I want to say it's a Ford Focus.
What color is that?
Blue. I guess it's like a royal blue.
Smith County Sheriff Larry Smith was on the case with the ATF back in 2010. He says when the tip came in with Bourque and McAllister's names, teams immediately began to track down the 19 and 21-year-olds, starting at Bourque's house, where he lived with his grandparents.
And as they're pulling into the driveway, the lady is pulling out, which ends up later it being Jason Bourque's grandmother.
With the information from the young men's family and friends, investigators already knew Bourque drove a blue Ford Focus. As the agents began talking to Bourque's grandmother, another clue would pop up.
So the garage door was still up from where she left. As they walked past the garage door, they recognized the shoes turned over, muddy tennis shoes, which are identical to the Skechers shoes.
Not wanting to give Mrs. Bourque any clue that law enforcement was onto her grandson, the investigators simply discussed with Jason's grandfather and Jason himself they were in the area looking at all blue vehicles.
As they're leaving the driveway, they call and give me the information, and before they get out of the area, we have our technical people headed out there to put up cameras and things.
Bourque was now under police surveillance. Daniel McAllister's older sister, Christy, works in dispatch for the Department of Public Safety. She was also working with law enforcement to provide details about her brother for the case.
My brother wears blue jeans and this old ratty pair of work boots that he's had seems like forever.
Now investigators knew Bourque owned Skechers and McAllister had work boots, just like the footprints left at the fires. Time was ticking to catch the young men before another church could burn.
We would send people out to convenience stores and everything in the area and try to see if we could get footage, all the video footage.
Bourque would be captured on video at an exxon off of 110 and Interstate 20 near the 9th church that had burned down, Dover Baptist Church in Lindale.
In the stores immediately after the fire started, out in isolated areas.
And later, the surveillance team would tail him to the former Atwoods in Tyler.
Video footage from all their store cameras that saw him go directly inside, go immediately to the restroom.
It was as if the smoke had cleared, pointing directly back to Bourque.
Carved in the divider in the stall of the men's restroom was a upside down cross with some scratching in there, and it says Little Hope was arson.
The ATF's team of fire experts had already re-investigated Little Hope and determined it was intentionally set on fire just like the 9 after it.
But the only other person who knew it was arson, because we didn't tell anybody else, was the fire setter.
The arrest affidavit for the then 19-year-old grew longer and longer as the surveillance team kept following him.
He actually dropped a cigarette butt on the TJC campus, and investigators were able to collect it.
Not only would Bourque's DNA point him back to the rocks used to break into the churches, he even took investigators back to the scenes of his crimes.
We actually were able to follow him past some of the churches that had been previously burned, which we felt was not a normal path from TJC to where he was living at the time.
During the church fires, McAllister had been traveling frequently between East Texas and San Antonio to visit his fiancée. Law enforcement tracked down his bus tickets to see if there was any correlation with the fires,
which showed he was in town here and put them together during these church fires.
When the 10 churches were burned down in 2010, it was a testament of faith for many church members.
We were urged by our pastor to remember that God is forgiving. None of us are perfect. And maybe we haven't done the horrible things that they did or he did, but we all need forgiveness.
If you saw the churches today, you'd never know what happened. Like a story from the Bible, Little Hope Baptist Church, Faith Church in Athens, Lake Athens Baptist, Grace Community Church, Thailand Baptist, First Church of Christ Scientist, Prairie Creek Fellowship, Russell Memorial United Methodist Church, Dover Baptist, and Clear Spring Missionary Baptist Church were resurrected and rebuilt.
The people's faith was so resilient. They bounced right back. These are strong country folks, and they didn't lose any hope.
And for some, the fires seem like a distant memory.
I would be willing to give them a second chance.
And you would welcome them to Little Hope?
Yes.
This allegation, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
As for Bourque and McAllister, after pleading guilty and waiving their rights to a trial nearly a year after the fires, the two are serving life sentences in prison.
Jason Bourque is then and there with the specific intent to commit the offense arson.
Bourque, then 20, was charged with 10 counts of arson and 3 counts of second-degree attempted arson in Smith, Henderson, and Van Zandt counties.
In a conservative East Texas area, I thought they got what I would expect had I done it.
You know, a lot of people from the churches, they did forgive him and they wanted his sentences to run consecutively. And I think that everybody has room for forgiveness.
He's filed for appeals over the years for a new trial, something that's never been granted.
It didn't create any anger in me that he would appeal or that he was a changed person or anything like that.
After being caught, both young men addressed East Texas to apologize for their actions. But there's still the question, why burn down churches? You said that Jason called you up about a week after he burned down the first 2, I believe.
Yes, came back on New Year's, and that's when he told me about it. It was like a week after, and we talked about it, and I was always on ice, so everything sounded good at that time.
McAllister, now 32, spends his days at Hughes Unit in Gatesville. You've previously said that you don't necessarily remember starting any of the fires. Is that still true?
Yes.
You don't remember?
No, ma'am. It was just go in fast enough to get everything and then walk out.
You never did it as an attack on God or on the church?
No, ma'am.
Is there anything that sticks with you from 10 years ago that still replays in your mind at night, maybe?
Being dumb enough to do anything that affected so many people like that.
How are you feeling about what y'all have been doing?
Felt bad that it had happened. I mean, I knew we were gonna get caught. I told him 2 weeks before we ever got arrested. I said, dude, they're not gonna let this go. That 2 weeks, we were done. Like that last one I was a part of, that was the last one.
Well, how did you come to the decision to stop?
I told him, I said, I'm done. And he was like, yeah. He said, yeah, I think, yeah, that's a good idea.
How do you feel about your sentencing and Jason's sentencing?
I think we got too much time for what we did, especially sitting around in prison with people that have done things far, far worse, and they're going home before any of us do.
Since you've been in prison, you've also come out and said that you are a Christian again. Are you still a Christian?
Yeah, right now I go on Sundays to the Mormon service.
As McAllister and I spoke, I learned about his mother's death in 2007 and his father's struggle with depression after. Do you feel that any of that might have influenced your decision or your drug use?
The drug use, yes. Because that's how I just pushed everything away, just getting high.
I believe a big influence in your life was your mother, who people say was a big part of the church that you grew up in.
That was the first death that I've seen growing up that actually affected me.
And I know that your dad struggled with that as well.
Yeah, he started drinking again pretty heavily.
McAllister almost lost his father too.
I heard yelling outside, and I walked out on the front porch and looked, and he had a rope around his neck, and we had to cut the rope to let him down.
Since he's been in prison, his dad passed away, but he still talks to his sisters. Part of the investigation, your own sister was involved. When that came out, I mean, how did you react?
When I was young, I chose my side, and she chose her side, so, but we still got along as family.
When you think back about Jason, how do you remember him?
A good person, just always trying to You know, before drugs, he was, you know, always helping people. He would put himself out there and help no matter what.
We have an overwhelming amount of evidence against, especially against Jason Bourque. And I don't think he would fare so well if he were to get a new trial.
Which is something Bourque's friend Felicia Quezada hopes for.
Yeah, he did make a mistake and he learned the hard way, but they say God does everything for a reason.
How did you get to know Jason Bourque?
We went to school together. He was just cool to hang out with. We just had really good conversation, which was nice.
What was your reaction when you learned about all of these churches around you that, you know, were being burglarized and then set on fire?
Well, I wasn't really sure. Like, I wasn't really sure the type of person they would actually want to do. And then I turned the TV on, and that's when I saw Jason and Daniel on TV.
How did you feel to know that it was your friend?
Then you, like, also start to wonder, like, well, what was going on, you know? He had always been kind of depressed.
And did he open up to you at all about his depression or what he was going through?
He felt like an outsider, but he was also really smart, and he was trying to quit smoking cigarettes, and he was on some medication to quit smoking cigarettes as well.
Did you see a difference when you were hanging out with him and he was taking Chantix? Did he seem maybe a little agitated or, I don't know, just different in any way?
He seemed really distant.
In 2016, Bourque said the Chantix he was prescribed in 2010 was causing him to have out-of-body experiences.
Yeah, he would talk about stuff that made no sense when he was on that prescription stuff. And I would tell him, man, you might just want to stop smoking naturally. I mean, he'd be like, yeah, you might be right. And then he'd kept taking it, though.
Would you say that that friendship is still there between the two of you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I wrote to him ever since he went to jail.
What are some of the things that he tells you about his life now?
Well, he is well educated, so he does, you know, still take college classes. And he did get a degree. We talk about spirituality and religion. You know, he wasn't very sure about his religion, and now we can talk on a more spiritual base.
If Jason's sentence ever was to be reduced and he was able to be free one day, what would you want people to know about him?
That he's only human.
According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Bourque will be eligible for parole in April, and McAllister will be eligible as well next year.